Everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is our Navitas Presents series, tonight featuring rapid form development for data collection. In addition to reviewing market trends for form building using low-code, no-code platforms, we're going to be diving into how to fast-track your progressive web applications development, how to build forms with advanced tools and resources, and how to seamlessly make changes to forms with built-in automated testing. So without further ado, let's get started with a warm welcome to our esteemed speakers tonight, Siva Thoda, Vice President of Cloud Practice, and Sinu Talasia, Vice President of Strategy, both from Navitas Business Consulting. Sinu, please take it away.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thanks for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone. Today, our agenda is to just give a high-level Navitas corporate overview, talk about what are the different trends that is happening in the web development. Then we're going to talk about the low-code form development marketplace and specifically go deep into a tool called form.io. Having said that, can you go to the next slide, Sabrina? Thank you. At a high level, for the people who are not familiar with Navitas, we are a small minority women-owned company. Our core capabilities are cloud enablement, where we have expertise in multi-cloud strategy, digital transformation, and data and intelligence. We do work at federal, commercial, and state customers. Some of them are, Department of Homeland Security, CMS, in federal. I'm just calling a few here. In commercial, we have a huge presence in Freddie and Fannie, and as well as Capital One. State and local, we have been doing a lot of work in state of Maryland and state of North Carolina. We have strong ties with technology partners. We are Azure Gold partners. We are Microsoft. We are AWS Advanced partner. We have a specialized partnership with the Snowflake and multiple other companies. Can you go to the next slide, Sabrina? All right. So the rapid advances in IT that have taken place over the last 10 years can really make one speechless. Every day when I'm surfing the websites, I really appreciate the profound changes that have taken place in the web development and also the design over the past decade. The development of programming technologies and tools is also gaining rapid speed. Although we are always advised to never look back, sometimes a good retrospective can be of use. In the past, there were websites that couldn't even be viewed in some browsers. They were made to work in IE or the Safari or the Netscape Navigator in the good olden days. Then some web pages were very slow, which was a major issue, even though we had a decent internet connection. In 2000s, web became the number one platform for development with the standard web technology stack using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And as a developer, we only focused on three simple steps to get a web application working. Write and save the code, open the files like local in the browser to make sure they work, and we just deploy them in one of these standard web pages. Then with the rapid development of the web, the requirements of the web platform also became complex. We have seen things like ASPs, JSPs, server-side rendering of the web pages. Then coding every little thing manually took a lot of time. Then we started looking into stuff like JavaScript, where we have to literally reinvent the wheel in each new project. Every new project is like an uphill task. Then we have seen the emergence of JavaScript frameworks. The first and foremost is the jQuery that we have seen in 2006, the CSS frameworks, where we standardized the CSS usage and the design. Then I remember using the Backbone and AngularJS in 2010. That was like a big game changer. That was everybody thought. Then we have seen Ember, then React, Vue. Then there's recently, like 4 years ago, the Angular and Split are some of the tools that came up. With this complication, we also saw an explosive growth of smartphones and smart TVs that caused web designers to develop pages that could adapt to all screen sizes. Not only the different cross-browser, now we are talking about different screen sizes. The number of gadgets with specific screen dimensions has multiplied, And based on this, we realized that we needed something called a responsive web design. That's why all these frameworks were came in. So to summarize, for me, the turning points are development of this JavaScript. Then came the Ajax techniques. Then we have this content management tools where we were dragging and dropping, and the pages were created. Then these web frameworks, and recently AWS Amplify, Google Service Workers, and PHP are some of the tools that are driving towards this concept called progressive web application. So fast forward in 2021, every major challenge a web developer faces involves, using a custom tool to resolve some kind of problem. As a result, the focus of developer shifted from how to code to which tool I have to use now. So, giving this context, I would like to pass it over to Shiva and talk about what are the tool stacks that are available and how this data collection and the form can be simplified.
Thank you, Srinu. Thanks for that wonderful introduction and the timeline, how the data collection has evolved in the last 20 years. So my name is Shiva Dota. I'm Vice President of Cloud Practice at Navitas. So I'm with Navitas for quite some time. So we have been doing the tech talks for the last few months during the COVID era. We started this series. So we're focusing on different aspects of it. We started with the multi-cloud. We took a detour and we presented on the completely data initiative in the last tech talk that we had given. We tend to focus on more technology aspects of it. We decided let's try to do some sort of a data collection in the COVID era where companies or enterprises can actually quickly stand up applications and trying to kind of make it available on cloud with low code, no code options, right? So even the low code, no code options that you see in the industry right now, they're like a buzzwords. But essentially, some of these platforms would actually give you some sort of customizations, which you can consider or argue it's like a little bit of code as well there. So some of the things that we're going to talk in the next 30 minutes or so have to do with how the applications at the enterprise scale, especially the form-based development for data collection. So end of the day, all the web applications are the front-end facing thin client-based, browser-based applications. So they are actually meant to collect the data, how quickly, efficiently they collect, and how easy it is to stand those applications pretty much dictate the life cycle of applications in the enterprise. So I'm going to take out some of the examples from my past experience where we ended up actually trying to basically set these up for big government agencies in the past, so that it gives a different context. So we tend to focus on from a business perspective, so to speak, in this talk, and we cover technology at the tail end of the tech talk. I know we ramble about a lot of technology and all that stuff. It's always good, but we would like to make a correction to the business cases here in this tech talk. And this tech talk will be followed up with a subsequent tech talk where we will showcase a lot of demos, how quickly we can stand up some fun applications that we can actually do it using the Form.io platform and integration with Power BI and a Power Platform, Power Apps from the Microsoft. That's coming in the future. I'm just giving a sneak peek. So now, without further ado, let's discuss from a typical, we call this data collection for a reason, right? So you name all these enterprise applications, which are predominantly web-based applications, and the timeline you guys just saw that Sinu was mentioning, how it evolved. If we started the journey with purely a server-side applications, even the front end and the front end of that application is strictly controlled from a back end side of it. So every call is that much expensive because processing is done at the server side. And with the complete kind of blow up of these JavaScript engines in the last 10 years or so, every day that you find a new JavaScript framework or an engine that they claim that's much more faster, reactive, and kind of lead you to that. So, right, that's not going to change. So there has to be a medium for the developers to quickly build applications on the form design. How they can basically embed within their applications is probably the goal of this whole tech talk. So let's start with some high-level requirements. So we're talking about complex multi-page forms. These are multiple forms, like a single-page app where you consider it has multiple forms, multiple tabs in it, and you can quickly fill the data, and you would need to do cross validations across those tabs or forms. And a wide variety of form components you would need to use. What I mean by that, the template options that you show, either forms, button grid or checkbox grid or multi-select or some text boxes and different sorts of visual palettes that you can see. All these forms shall support those things. And some conditional logic and also some workflow. It has to have some workflow, even though it's like we are talking purely on the forms-centric use cases here, but it is expected to have some basic workflow. And the complex data validations, what we mean by that, because any form, we're talking about a form that can capture upwards of a few hundreds of data entities that we are basically presenting to the users with the application we are developing. So it requires any complex validations. The platform should be able to support those things too. These are like front-end and back-end validations, how quickly you can embed these validations with less code or very little code, or some configurations you could do. And the fifth most important point is how you can integrate with other services. In this day and age, Microsoft has this nice, beautiful way they are basically developing these forms from their Power and Power Apps construct. But you have certain restrictions in the Power Apps. There is that cloud buy-in that you have to bind in that you will end up actually facing. At the same time, it only has integrations to a limited set of kind of technology stack or choices that you could think of. And another important thing is you need to consider authentication and authorization, how this whole thing actually works out. In a form that you're exposing where the stakeholders could be from submitters to like approvers to reviewers to somebody else. So how are you going to drive that model is also very important when we look at that auth model for the whole forms and form-based entities, data entities you would like to capture through those forms. And again, that ties into the whole RBAC or attribute-based mechanism that you would like to enforce. And another important aspect you would like to consider is so data integrations with some legacy databases. So what we mean by that is, so it's not like you're just capturing certain data entities and trying to build some new like greenfield applications. That would be easy, but that doesn't alleviate the problem of currently enterprises are facing. They already have legacy databases where they capture all the data from different other front-end based applications that they have been supporting. So can they support a legacy database and render the data in a form-based rendering for the reviewers to quickly look at it? That's what we mean by legacy database integration, is like trying to tap into the existing data sets in whichever structural format or the relational format it was designed for. Can it actually render back and trying to show it to the user like a UI perspective is what we mean by that. And the data security and compliance is very critical. And we talked about the role-based, attribute-based and RBAC-based model. At the same time, can this platform support data in REST and data in transit? Can it support latest authentication protocols like OAuth, OpenID? I don't think it's the latest, but at least the current trend, the industry is going OAuth and OpenID combination. A lot of people seem to be using it. And can that platform support any API, which can be a form? Can it be basically exposed as a REST service? And that REST service needs to be basically invoked from, let's say, the caller application, in this case, some sort of an embedded web application. Can it actually tie to that form using the REST API, using some traditional tokens everyone kind of understands in the JavaScript world, how it can actually interact with the JWT token-based authentication to get the data from the platform. And this ties into the easy to use embedded builders. What I mean by that, I am custom developing my own JavaScript application. And I don't want to be like doing all these. Of course, there are well-known frameworks that you can tap into and trying to build these palettes, how you wanted to render the elements of it, nested structures or whatever you can think of from a visual perspective. But I don't want to do that design are trying to basically do that, but I would rather do that design visually and basically make a JSON out of it, and I would like to call from my caller application. So that's where the embedded nature of the forms integration comes into play. Accessibility and compliant rendering behavior. What I mean by that is it 508 compliant? So these visual elements and all that stuff, if you look at that as a React, Vue, or Angular, most of the tools in the industry from a 508 compliance testing, you wouldn't be like getting a pass score by using those tools. So it's very important, especially in the federal domain, where most of our customers that we serve, 508 compliance are utmost important. So talking about the single page reactive applications, responsive applications, and progressive applications is one thing. Making them compliant with the 508 is another thing where we need to have a delicate balance of giving that accessibility while not compromising on the modern way to push these applications. So 508 compliance, can this actually support these use cases? And supporting mobile end users. Nowadays, that's very much basic requirement. So whatever you could see in a desktop form factor, people would like to render the same UI in a web application. Progressive applications come into play in that sense, where you can actually have an application that is PWA natively, that can literally, like, you can basically publish it in an app store, like an app with that additional skin that you basically, it renders itself in an app. So can the platform support those things is very critical because we are catering to the audience from mobile applications as well as the desktop traditional enterprise applications. And there are many more requirements like that. So these would be the common things that one would look at it when they're looking at like doing some form-based applications with essentially with very low code. I wouldn't say no code because none of these platforms are actually no code. Even though that's the industry trend, people try to latch onto, but these are like low code or significantly less code platforms. One would need to do that. So why we are talking about all these aspects, right? Form-centric aspects, security, different form entities that you would need to do. These are all the things that are required in order to do a meaningful application that you're doing at enterprise level. So I would like to give one example when we talk about these requirements. So back in like 2013-14, I was involved with an agency, CMS, where we were on a venture to kind of develop a form-based application, predominantly a web application that can serve pretty much all 50 states of Medicaid agencies across the United States. So we're talking about, so if you look at that, if you basically dissect those use cases, if you're talking about like definitely form-based applications within the Medicaid community, healthcare is complex, as you guys can understand. It is rule-driven, highly rule-driven. It has some workflow because we're talking about states controlling these programs, but they still need to get a blessing from CMS, which kind of pays, does the cost sharing on the Medicaid programs. What that really means is we are talking about people, stakeholders on state side as well as the CMS side. So essentially what these are basically giving, these use cases are manipulating themselves into the requirements I just mentioned. So it has a lot of forms, a lot of fields, and probably a few thousands of users across the states, and every state run their own customizations. So we're talking about all the complexities that we're talking about it here in this particular slide will tie to that. So obviously, when we implemented a system, we were using at that time low-code, no-code options like Appian and competition like that. This call is not literally like pushing any product, but we are trying to basically showcase this tech talk, how a low-code, no-code platform in this day and age can help customers and how Navitas can help. So that's why I'm taking these examples, which will make sense in the enterprise. We purely talk about technology, end of the day. It has its own benefits, but we need to tie it to the actual use cases. So we went with that approach of trying to do a development using a low-code platform or a no-code platform at that time was Appian, and trying to do that. So let's say in fast forward 6 years from then, and you can see right now in the current industry that current situation we are in, especially in this COVID era, all the communities across the country, either they have some applications that are kind of given to citizens to kind of register for vaccine and report their results or report their symptoms and all. if you think about those use cases in the current pandemic state we are in, if you are trying to develop those forms, because time to market is very critical, these applications won't have any life, probably, maybe, hopefully next year, right? If things get better. So in order to develop the forms like symptom checker, or you wanted to roll out an application where you can register for all these vaccination sites and how you can book the appointments and all. If you think about all those use cases, it's nothing but data collection that we are basically doing. We're taking the information from whoever is trying to register, which site is going to register or she is going to register, and trying to basically integrate with some behind the scenes data sets, how the data actually flows through. So everything has a web application implications, and preferably it should have that mobile interface too. So these are all the things that play into that. So it's very apt if you were to develop some of these applications or apps using this platform for the current trends at the current time we are in right now. Now, without getting further into that, right, the tangential that I went, like trying to discuss that particular use case, how we developed that particular CMS application where all 50 states across the United States interact with the central CMS office with a little bit of workflow, rich workflow, along with forms. Now look at the different aspects of that application, how it looks like. If you look at this from this particular slide, at a minimum, it will have at least 3 different layers. We're talking about an application layer and a form layer and a submission database layer. So application layer, that's what we call this application that you're setting it up as an app. It should obviously shall handle all the requirements that I was mentioning earlier. Security, it should basically do some sort of a role-based access control and how it can integrate with additional interfaces for the form to work or function based on the requirements. And essentially that layer should be low-code option so that we are not incurring a lot of time in trying to develop some custom applications. And second layer we are talking about is a rich form layer, where you're going to showcase how quickly we can set up these components with like the latest and the greatest UI components that you could see, how you can basically take it from a palette library, a template library, and trying to basically build these forms. So the form layer is that central part where you're actually going to design the form and come up with the mapping, how you're capturing the input fields with whatever you're persisting to the database. And the last one is obviously the submission layer. So how are you persisting these entities? How are you going to basically store them in the database? So this would be like high level 3 components one could think of. I'm just super simplifying this entire process for the sake of conversation. So it also have a couple of other things. So can it actually pre-populate existing data sets from a legacy database? That's why that integration is very important as well. When you design a form, you're capturing a data and you're storing it and persisting in your database. At the same time, I would like to basically showcase the data that is already pre-populated from various other means. Some other applications are driving the data sets. Can this form can render that? That's also very critical. And another thing is you have a central set of library of forms that you can use in order to mix and match your app and the flow and the sequence of forms that you would like to capture. That means you need to use some template forms that you're designing within your workflow. So that kind of brings into a platform like form.io. Again, this presentation is not necessarily geared towards centrally on the form.io, but rather trying to showcase one platform that is out there in the marketplace, which can be useful in trying to kind of build these applications rather quickly and deploy them rather quickly and operate at cloud scale. So how this works essentially is you can see from the left side, high level simplified overarching architecture. So the form.io platform is like a browser based. So designers and developers, they log into the browser as well, and they interact with the form builder, which is a browser based builder, like a visual template where you can drag and drop things and design the form the way you want it. And you can tie the resources, you can tie the users, and you can tie the resources with the actions, all that stuff. And the metadata of this entire form data and all the templates, everything gets stored in a document database. It actually natively stores in the MongoDB. If you want to use their managed offering, form.io, it will end up storing everything inside the MongoDB. One thing to note here is it doesn't have to be the MongoDB, it's the MongoDB protocol compliant. What I mean by that, if you were to deploy like as a PaaS solution within your own firewall, either on AWS or Azure, you can use either Document DB or you can use Cosmos DB, which are compliant with the MongoDB protocol. So it's not a tie-in, so to speak, but it stores everything, the state of the state logic, everything else, and the metadata of the forms and configurations, everything inside a Document DB, which can be scaled based on how we are basically persisting the data entities. And it is highly decoupled architecture, obviously, because you can pick your own choice of the JavaScript framework or the flavor you like or the flavor of that month or whatever that happens to be very famous. You can use that, and they support all sorts of JavaScript libraries, either Vue, Angular, or React or React Native based on your use cases, highly decoupled. And on the forms platform side, you can make it highly available, because you're running the entire thing, the API servers and the PDF servers inside the Docker containers. So you can scale them how you wanted to scale them based on how many forms you are basically exposing as part of your application and how many users you're expecting. You can scale them horizontally. There are no limitations. And the good thing is their licensing model doesn't really care. If you run one server or 100 servers, it doesn't matter. So that's one of the things about that form.io platform. So you can actually scale an application at a very good cloud scale. What I mean by that is few millions of users for basically exposing these forms. And you can scale based on your resource allocation that you wanted to do, how many users are you expecting, and all that good stuff. And I mentioned there's a progressive web application also. It basically fits in that mode. What that really means is it can work as like an offline application. What I mean by that, if you're developing and pushing a PWA, progressive web application, with little or no network connectivity, it can still basically work in your mobile device because it can work off of offline, because it does some tuning, how quickly efficiently they can get the data from the actual server that is hosting into the so-called PWA web application. So it has a flavor of works offline mode, very critical and low latency, high latency, and little or no network or intermittent network scenarios. You can actually use this form building application there. Very critical for remote areas, how they wanted to access these applications. Like I said earlier, on the right side, you can see how developers gonna integrate or interact with the platform, like a browser-based, form-based designer, where you can basically do all the designing of your form and tie it with actions and tie it with your custom validations if you wanted to run, or regular validations, all that stuff, all that can be orchestrated. This is the low code part of it I'm talking about. So you don't have to write a code. Literally, you can use the configuration options and trying to design your forms. Another way is embedded applications, how they can actually call a form. So a good thing about this particular platform is if you design a form, and you can basically make that as a REST API service without any changes whatsoever. So whenever you design a form, you will have an interface within the browser where you can get the necessary information to try to access that form programmatically as a REST service. What that means is it will give you those API keys, which URL endpoint you need to hit, what are the service contracts you need to pass in order to basically get a response from that service. So that's all basically built into the platform. This is basically a repeat of earlier things. So we saw that timeline slide where we started from 2000 and the current time we are in right now, in the last 20 years, how they transformed. The landscape has changed because you see a lot of web applications, rich applications, and you can actually choose to do it if you have the bandwidth to custom write and pick the latest and greatest JavaScript framework or most famous or whatever that has much more adoption in the marketplace. You can do that. Or enterprises, they don't want to kind of get into this boat of custom development, so to speak. Rather, they wanted to do certain applications for like a time-based applications. I would really like to run this application for a short duration. Once I'm done with that, I don't need that anymore because all I need is the data. Literally, the data capture is the main thing here. I'm setting this application, again, which is a time-based application. I can quickly work on this application by using the form designer and deploy that application, roll that application at cloud scale. Once I'm done with it, after that application serves its purpose, I don't see any need. So for that, custom development is not so much preferred use case or mode of delivering that. For those use cases, Form.io basically excels at that, this particular platform. Like I said earlier, it is highly decoupled architecture, scalable, and you can deploy anywhere, any cloud. We'll go through that in the next few slides. So how you do the management, right? So I said like developers can use the browser-based interface in order to basically design the forms, and they can version control every form that you design. It actually produces a JSON file. So if you wanted to version control that forms, because you will be incrementally releasing the new version of your application, and you can basically version control your forms, and you can make it as a part of your version control system. You can integrate with your GitHub, GitLab, whatever version control system that you're using, you can basically tie with that because everything is a JSON file. And we're essentially talking about JavaScript flavored files. From a developer perspective, that's what they need to know. Other than that, they don't need to know much because platform is that much helpful or conducive enough for them to basically get going and quickly publish. From a form builder, they don't even have to be developer level savvy from a skills perspective. What they really need to know is like how the requirements can translate into the forms which require to capture the data part of that application. If they know the requirements, they can drag and drop the grids of different sorts, how we can design and everything. They don't even have to code anything. So they interact with the platform using browser-based form manager as well. So you can version control that part as well, how you are doing that. From a developer perspective, on the left side, mostly the developers who work on embedded applications, that means they have their own rich application in a JavaScript, but they wanted to basically use the form builder from the forms.io platform. They can basically embed that and trying to call from their application, much more code-centric approach. They can interact with the platform via API calls, or they can basically do the form designing in the browser itself. These are the two integration points for developers and non-developers to interact with the form.io platform itself. And this is like a platform architecture. Like I said earlier, this is like a repeat of earlier slides. So you have the developers. From a stakeholders point of view, we have developers, form builders, and business authors. Business authors, we are talking about highly non-technical people who can basically see the look and feel from a usability standpoint, from an HCD, UCD standpoint, how they visualize how the form is designed. Is it really capturing the essence of the requirements and things like that? They can basically look at that from a browser-based form management interface. And they all hit. Obviously, we're talking about horizontally scaling these API servers and the Form.io main core components. So they will be sitting behind a load balancer inside your cloud enclave or on premises, wherever you're deploying. It doesn't have to be on AWS or Azure. It can be on a bunch of machines on your own on-premise data center, fronted by a load balancer. So the load balancer basically serves the traffic. One thing about this platform is it's completely stateless. That is the reason why you could achieve that horizontal scaling and the cloud scaling I was talking about. So every call that you make to the API server is like a bunch of REST calls. So it doesn't share the state, so to speak, but it can do a bunch of things within the form. If you are doing it like a database validation, you're connecting to your legacy database and get some data. Based on the data that you get from the database, you wanted to do subsequent validations, you can do that. So one of the reasons why the platform from bottom up is a stateless makes it that much horizontally scalable for the cloud scale that this platform is capable of. And again, it uses MongoDB. Doesn't have to be MongoDB. MongoDB protocol compliant would work, like DocumentDB on AWS or Cosmos DB on Azure. And again, so same view. If you look at the center part of it, the whole form builder part of it, it has all the rules. You can basically structure your forms into projects, and you can do the layouts. It can actually do some PDF forms as well, and it will have, you can deploy the form UI components as PDF servers, which I'm going to talk a little bit later. And the data components, the workflow, basic workflow. Obviously, it's not an extensive workflow because this is not a workflow product, rather a form building product. And the whole single sign-on that form IO exposes how it integrates with the IDPs, identity providers, what kind of like a SAML OAuth or what kind of sessions that you need to basically exchange the token with the identity provider. It has all the features built in the platform as configurations. You don't need to code for any of those things. For example, like a SAML type exchange, it is doing with an IDP. You can basically go to the settings section of the form manager and trying to basically have those SAML sessions and the SAML scheme that you wanted to use in order to talk to the IDP, for example, and the roles and templates and the platform itself supports multi-tenancy. If you're building an application and you're basically kind of trying to do it for more than one customer, but similar flavor, like the example that I had given earlier. So like the Medicaid, 50 Medicaid states, you're building a single application, but state of Virginia captures the Medicaid rules as quite differently than, let's say, state of Maryland or state of North Carolina. So you can have that multi-tenancy, like state of Virginia can have its own tenancy in that application, single application, and you can capture the data entities and everything else within the realm of the Virginia forms, set of forms, and you can make the data completely separate from state of Maryland or state of North Carolina and so forth. So it has that multi-tenancy aspect as well. And I said earlier, versions, very critical, because once you build the forms and go live, you'll be having subsequent releases. You can capture the versions as well. And it's truly multi-cloud solution where it can reside on any of the clouds. If you want to get out of one cloud and trying to put it on a different cloud, it would work because you're abstracting a lot of things. You're using only the cloud stores like S3 for persisting the documents, or Blob Store on Google or Azure. So they will translate themselves if you were to move from one cloud to a different cloud, or you wanted to do a multi-cloud implementation as well. In that way, it's like cloud scale across multi-clouds is what it provides. It has rich integrations with obviously quite a few in the marketplace, like traditional SQL connector. It will connect to any database, a legacy database, as long as it's the ANSI SQL compliant SQL data source. And it will connect with a Microsoft 365 suite and MongoDB, obviously. And it is the solution itself is containerized and packaged, so it has a Docker integration as well. And you can do webhooks out of the box. And like I said earlier, the forms that you're designing, visual representations of the forms that you're designing can be exposed with a single click as an API call. It's that much easier. So a couple of things that comes to my mind when I look at a platform like this. So if you're like trying to go for an application that you wanted to do, one idea is to use the latest and greatest JavaScript framework out there and trying to build on it. Or else you can use this tool to generate the code or the the bootstrap project itself, the way you want to design the form entities, because end of the day, it is generating literally a flavor of a JSON where you can embed into your own application, your own JavaScript application. So you can use this platform just for the for quick development itself. You don't need to construct all these things, design all these things, go on a multi-month and multi-week development cycle in order to push that application to production. So those are all the things that comes to my mind, how people can use this. And like I said earlier, everything is captured as like a bunch of JavaScript files and the rules and everything else. So you can version control them, easily version control them. Another good aspect is you can tie with the CI solution of your choice. We just put the Jenkins there. Doesn't mean you have to use only Jenkins, because the API server is by itself can be accessed as an API. So you can bring in any CI tool of your choice. You wanted to use the cloud native CI solution and Azure DevOps or the Code Star complete code. When I say Code Star code, AWS service that you can think of, you can basically integrate with that. You don't need to do it from a cloud-based Jenkins or an open source Jenkins or whatever CI tool of your choice that exists. It has wide range of options in order to enforce so-called DevSecOps process around the form building and delivering and trying to basically deliver the solution and to the production. This is basically a line of business use case, right? So we talk about this like if literally at this, you can think of that example that I was giving earlier, like a platform where CMS basically manages this application where all states can look at that and trying to get their own flavor of, let's say, the form submission that they needed to do in order to get funding from CMS, because CMS is bearing the cost of these Medicaid programs or cost sharing, so to speak. So you can, but CMS is asked to kind of set this enterprise application to cater to that. So this is how it looks like. So based on how you're delivering this, you can have set of forms that whole multi-tenancy I was talking about it. And you can quickly build these forms to capture the data. In this case, literally like the data collection from the states is what CMS is looking into. You can capture a bunch of healthcare metrics. You can capture a bunch of healthcare plan data or whatever that states have been running on. And we're talking about thousands of data entities from each state. So in order to do a form development in those kinds of use cases where it is serving across the board with that kind of complexity, you can use a platform like this, not necessarily this one, but definitely this fits into that mold where you can quickly set this up and continuously do the releases, and time to market is that much easier. And completely cloud-based solution or a multi-cloud solution, and you can purchase all these documents to the cloud-native document stores. So I think I'm concluding this. The reason we made this as completely like high-level overview is to tee it up for the next tech talk. We're going to do complete demo in the coming weeks, so that you have this context. Whoever following our series on these tech talks, they have this context. So we're going to showcase literally building an application, and how quickly we make changes and publish them. How easy it is to do this in a live session is what we are planning for our next tech talk. With that, I'm concluding this high-level overview of this form development using our data collection, rather using form.io platform, and open for Q&A.
I just want to give a quick summary too, Shiva. Thank you for deep dive into this. So if you have to summarize, right, wow, if you can go back to the previous slides, Shiva, if you don't mind, where would a developer use this form, right? So when a company having use cases which requires rapid development of a web front end that is responsive to a tablet or a mobile or web application, this is perfect use case. And this is primarily designed for use for developers, not for the business here. So this tool is helping developers speed up their development, enable rapid development. At the same time, it can also be used by the business, because some scenarios where there are thousands of manual forms in organizations converting into electronic forms, we can have these controls put in place where the business people can restrictively and use this form dot features to build these quick application forms. At the same time, this can also be used in conjunction with this microservice-based architecture that is being developed. So anything that has to do with the front end, form.io is used to capture the data from there. Behind the scenes, a typical microservice-based application, or things, advanced concepts like AWS Amplify, where you define a JSON, the DB. Once you define a table structure, the JSON is created, and the same thing can be used here. So these are the pretty high-level use cases. We have also used at some customers where the miner, as Shiva was mentioning, anywhere there is like a form level validations, those can be plugged into the Form.io. It has an API. For example, when you have to, in a dropdown, you have to pull in a list of values. Form.io can pull these values and display to the user front end using the REST API calls. But if there is a complex business logic where when I sent an address in the form, you have to sometimes validate like the zip code validation and enhance or enrich the address and do some kind of business rule validation or something like a payment validation, credit card validation, those kind of stuff, we typically push it down to the microservice in the backend, which does the, we use things like Camunda and these kind of orchestrations behind the scenes to have additional business logic once the form is submitted. That's those are the few points that I would like to talk about here, and open up to the Q&A.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Steven. This was a great, so much information was shared. I'm sure there are questions. In fact, I'm seeing some come through now. I'd like to allow everyone to turn on their video. You can raise your hand if you have any questions, or you can direct them into the chat and I will help moderate. The first question we have is the code that is generated considered to be full stack / open source code?
Yeah, so the code it generates is essentially JavaScript. So like I said earlier, it uses obviously the JavaScript libraries. So in a way, it's like a open source, right? So not a closed source. I don't know whether we can put that boundary, like say that open source, definitely not a closed source. So you're developing the form and it generates a bunch of JSONs behind the scenes, so which is predominantly JavaScript files. And what is the other question? Sorry. It is a two-part question you were asking. It's not a full stack in the sense like, so so you're doing, this is purely from a form's view of things. Like let's say you are designing a form. So I don't know how to put this one flavor of the full stack, right? So it gives you the flavor once you design the form, and it gives you that API that you can call, like a service call. And the platform serves the request for that API, or it can generate a JSON file you like to use it in your own application. So I wouldn't call a full stack flavor for that. So it's just that form part of it is actually gets generated for you, and you can manage that.
Yeah, end of the day, anything that you capture in the front end using the form.io is stored as a JSON and sent it to the backend, right? So bottom line, it's a JSON that is being generated. Everything you do with this tool is a JSON in the backend.
Wonderful, thank you. Next question we have is there a limit on how many steps you can have in a multi-step form?
No, there are no limits. Again, it all comes down to the usability aspects of it, right? I'm again speak from the experience. When we talk about that use case at CMS, I was talking about a single form that has multiple tabs. You can cram in as many tabs or as many steps you want in a single form and present that for data collection. At some point of time, it becomes cumbersome. It may not be user optimal experience, right? So those things will come into play and deciding how those steps should be laid out, as opposed to whether the platform can serve a number of steps or things of that nature.
All right. And the next question I see is, how does this compare to WPF, Windows Presentation Foundation application?
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. I don't know much about WPF Presentation Foundation applications. So if you have a specific question about that, then we can answer. To me, right? So one second, Sina. So to me, right, this one actually resonates with the latest and greatest from Azure or Microsoft. They have this whole concept of Power Apps, which kind of gives you that flavor of the form. in a rudimentary state where you can quickly set it up and trying to basically collect the data points using those forms from the Power Apps. This is much more richer experience. We're talking about richer forms and natively PWA type forms.
Yeah. So if I have to take this question, right, I'm familiar with the WPF. This is typically, right, how do you compare like an Angular versus some other React kind of question? Form.io is purely for building forms to capture, whereas the WPF is a framework which is much more advanced. Not only it does the data collection, but it has additional things like 2D and 3D graphics, animation styles. It's a vector-based a framework. So any organization, if they are comfortable in using the .NET or the whole core technology is built on .NET, they could certainly go for .NET. But for things like just pure use cases where I have to quickly, in a faster way, develop this form or a data capture, then we would recommend using a form.io. Again, two different use cases. Form.io use cases are subset of the WPF that we have to do.
Thank you.
Just like an Angular, we embed this form.io.
Yeah, thanks. See you.
All right, we have two more questions, and I think we have time for both. The first is, how granular can we control the form elements? For example, can a user access salary element? Can maybe user one access salary elements, but user two cannot?
Yes. So the palette gives you these flavors, and display rules can control a user one kind of see certain elements, and user two cannot see those elements. These are literally you're showing the entities by some rules. So like I said earlier, we know the persona, whoever logs into that, trying to access that form. So we have that information. You can run the rules on the RBAC model, run the rules on authorization that user has, entitlements he has, and trying to come up with the rules in the display rules section of it and show or don't show or not show. You can do that. But again, to make it simple, right? I would like to go back to the use cases again, where we have done this. You would rather not do it a user, you would rather do it a group that user belongs to. That way you can control the whole access rather cleanly as opposed to single user.
Right. And in scenarios where the tool doesn't support out of box these controls that we have a custom script based controls that you can add on top of that. So some things like, behind the scenes, you want to add some other logic within the data to restrict the users to with a specific view. Like you're in certain state, you only see the zip codes within the state kind of things. You can actually go back and have this additional logic in the code itself.
Yep.
In the tool.
And you can write custom rules if you wanted to. Again, it boils down to your use cases, how much you are willing to customize to your requirements.
All right, thank you. And last but not least, and actually we might have one more question. For those users that are in a hybrid platform, if their apps are in on-premise and some are in cloud, can this be a hybrid solution?
Yeah, it can. So you can answer that question literally in like probably a few different ways. So when the applications that you're integrating, they're spread across on-premise and the cloud, obviously it has the connected framework where you can talk to them. And if you're actually doing a hybrid deployment of the entire platform itself, you can do that too, because essentially this is some sort of a stateless API servers that are serving this entire traffic that is coming from the invokers or caller applications. I would go to that extent. It has the ability, if you wanted to do in hybrid scenarios, you can do that, not just for the platform setup itself, rather which applications that this particular platform talking to as well.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in one more question. This is maybe a similar use case. So if a client has a legacy web application and also one with a more advanced web app, same data source, can those be integrated into two apps with Forms.io? And so, for example, if you click a social security number in the legacy app, will it render in the new, more advanced dashboard application?
So you're like coming up with like you have a flavor of a legacy application. Let me first repeat the question, see if I understand your question even properly. I think it's coming from Guy, I guess. right? So you have a legacy application, you have a new web fancy application you're talking about. The new application we're talking about, which encapsulate these two, you have the option, because those applications are essentially capturing the data and it sits in some data store. It could be structural, unstructured, or semi-structured format. If you're doing a new forms.io, you can basically get those data entities coming from legacy and modern by having that connected framework. That is one way to look at it, right? Or let's say you have developed a new form where you would like to basically use it, like weave it into your legacy application or your modern application, because you can always use this as an API. If the legacy can a way to call this, you can call this as like a REST service. Or a modern application can call this as an embedded UI, it can call that way. Again, depending upon specific use cases, it has that versatility, how you wanted to build applications rather quickly.
Yeah, so I will also add a few things to this, right? Since it's the same data source, the the UI doesn't matter, right? If you're building a brand new UI with additional data elements, let's say you're building this modern with this fancy dashboards, when you submit, end of the day, it's a form. But we might have to, if you want to save it to the old legacy database, all you have to do is write an adapter in this REST service, convert this latest form data that you're getting it, the JSON, into that legacy using that adapter, so that your the database is not changing and you always have the sync with this new UI. At the same time, your legacy application is also syncing, so there is no issue. And anytime you do a new save in the new the fancy dashboard, you always have this raw JSON stored as is in the structure. So you can go back in time and figure out, what the data, and you can update the schema as and when needed. So it really works well in this kind of iterative and incremental transition from legacy to the modern applications.
Awesome. I'm going to keep us over just one more minute because I have a great final question. Is the newer version form backward compatible with data persisted with earlier versions of the form?
Yeah, that's a very good question, right? So yes, it does, in the sense, let's say there is a form.
Someone's at front door.
Sorry about that. So let's say there is a form that has like 10 entities, and you have a form version 1.2 with, let's say, 15 entities, right? So, and you basically upgrade and you have a new version of that, you deploy. So you don't want to break the application because you've added the 5 entities in the newer version of it. So you can handle, there are workflow implications too, and you can handle those scenarios in the new version of the form without breaking it, by making it backward compatible, making certain entities as optional if it did not really capture those, and show them as blanks, or you don't even have to show them, because you can, based on the version you're basically publishing the form, or the users who are using that one, you can show some display rules, you can hide those fields too. So there are options how you wanted to handle that. So from form rendering itself, these are very easy to handle. I would say, if anything else, there are some other things one would need to consider when you're designing this kind of backward compatibility and all. There are workflow implications actually, right? Because end of the day, forms is one way to capture the data entities and store it in a database. But if it runs with a workflow as well, you would need to handle those scenarios differently. So I would consider those things as well in order to come up with what is that backward compatible nature of this you would like to basically implement in your use cases or in your application use cases.
So let me add a few more points here, right? Every form that is saved in the forms.io data has a unique identifier with the schema changes, so that the metadata is always stored there. Whenever you're adding new fields, when you go back and retrieve the old form, it always looks at the schema that was preserved there, and it's always backward compatible.
Okay. I promise that was the last question, but if you do have any more, please email them. I put my email in the chat. That's sabrina.woodleaf@navitas.com. Thank you again to Sinu and Siva for this wonderful presentation, Rapid Form Development for Data Collection. For more information on forms building and PWAs, or to learn more about Navitas, please visit www.navitas-tech.com. Don't forget to connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you for another session of Navitas Presents, and hope you have a wonderful evening.